What's going on, everyone? It's Brandon Turner. I'm excited to bring you today's episode. Cam is on the episode with me, but he had to run, so he didn't get to record the intro. So I'm doing the intro alone. So this episode is with a buddy of mine. His name is Trey Stone. So I say this story later in the podcast, but I'll say it now. Is like, before meeting Trey, I had like 10 people be like, you know Trey, right? And I'm like, I don't know Trey. And they're like, you got to know Trey. He's the coolest guy ever. And everyone just kept saying that. And so then finally I meet Trey and I'm like, dude, he's the coolest guy ever. He is a super legit, awesome real estate investor that scaled up to 6,000 units and then like took a long break to help raise his kids, which is awesome. And then he's getting back into it pretty hot and heavy right now. So on this episode, we talk about that. We talk about how we met at the REI Summit, which, by the way, are you going to the REI Summit? I hope so. REISummit2025.com. That's where Trey and I met, and I've met a lot of good people through the summit. Hope to see you there. It's going to be in Austin, Texas, first week of June. But anyway, we talk about that. We talk about how actually in some ways retirement is amazing. In some ways it sucks. In some ways you can think about that in your future. We talk about raising capital in the past, how he's doing it today and how you can do it. We talk about some no and low money down stuff, how to build mentorships. We talk about finding the right market, like what's the best market in America. Yeah, at one point he casually just mentions like he's making $178,000 a month in pure cash flow right now on one property. If you want to know how he does that and more, listen to this episode. All right, that's it. Let's go. Trey Stone, dude. Not only do you have the coolest name in the world, it's like the most sick name. You're one of the coolest guys I know. So I'm excited to dig in. Thank you for joining us today. I'm pumped.
Thank you, man. I feel the same way in return. I mean, the day I can grow that beard, then I can catch up. But right now, I got a ways to go.
There you go. Well, man, I want to start with this, and we'll get into your story. But I know you went from like just like a single rental house all the way up to 6,000 units. I think I heard you had a $30 million net worth, and then you quit. Like you stopped, you retired. Like what the heck? Like, and then you didn't do anything for a decade. I want to know, why did you stop when you were just cruising along so well?
You know, for me, when I got started in the business, I grew up next to a trailer park in, a suburb of Houston that you probably wouldn't feel comfortable walking around there at night. It was a pretty crazy part of town. And for me, I just felt like if I could, one day have a brick home and make, $100,000 a year, like I'd be set. I mean, you can have a John boat, a decent truck, a decent house, a little money in the bank, and be able to do the standard 2 weeks a year, take the family on vacation somewhere, Disney World, whatever. Yep. I thought like that would be awesome because not a lot of people from my neighborhood had, that. And so I kept, as I was buying more and more real estate over the years, I kept finding myself, kind of catching myself really, like moving the goalpost on what I felt like was enough. And at some point I realized that there's really no enough. You're always going to find, a new goal. And if you're the type of person that's successful, that just happens automatically. So what happened that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks was that my wife was pregnant with twins. And I realized, oh, wow, I'm going to be a dad. And the year that happened was the year I decided I'm never going to buy another deal for the rest of my life. And I stuck to it for a good 10 years because I decided, that's what's going to be important now, not more money.
Mm-hmm. Dude. Yeah, by the way, Cam here is also expecting twins. Have we announced that on the show, or did I just ruin the surprise for everyone? I don't know.
I don't know if we have, but I am. Yeah, we're expecting twins this summer, so it'll be.
So the most important question.
And my condolences, because congrats on the twins, and sorry you won't sleep for a couple of years, but it'll be all right.
It'll be worth it. That's the most important question of the day: is what can Cam expect? What advice do you have for a parent, especially one of going into two at the same time?
Well, the single most important thing that I did not listen to at first, but I sure figured out later, is that when you're helping out, like, if you guys set aside milk and then you're going to get up and do a late night feeding or something like that, you just, doesn't matter whether the other one's awake or not. You get them both up, you get them going, you get them both going with a bottle, have a couch in the room where the nursery is with like, a pillow for each kid. And that way you can be kind of half sacking out while it's happening. Yeah. And they both eat, they both get new diapers, back in the cribs, crying or not. Like, you got to get them synced up, because if you have those kids on different schedules, it'll just make you and your wife, zombies for a long time. Yeah. So I had to learn that the hard way.
Well, what's amazing is we're coming out, because we had our first three like 18 months and 18 months. So we had three all super young. we're finally getting out of the stage of them not sleeping during the night or waking up and getting into our beds at night. And so we just decided to run it back with 2 this time. So,
All right.
yeah, so I haven't slept for 7 years at this point. So just another couple years, we'll be
Now you're just showing off.
fine. Exactly. So, but we can't wait. It'll be a lot of fun.
Oh,
But,
very cool.
mhm.
Well, Trey, going back to yours, why do so many people, struggle with that idea of enough is enough? Like we all get into real estate for financial freedom, right? So we can do what we want. And then we just work until we're 100. Like,
Yeah.
why do most people struggle with that? And how were you different?
I think one thing that kind of helped me is, I guess a good metaphor for it would be like Robert's book, with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and how he kind of learned from these 2 different examples in his life. And I had someone in my life that was very unhappy, even though that person was very wealthy and he owned a lot of real estate. He was one of the people that I learned from. And while there were some things I could learn from him about real estate, he was very unhappy with his life. And I noticed that he had become kind of addicted to bragging about the deals and having sycophantic people around him that were always telling him how smart he was and how cool he was because what they could get from him. And I realized that like his ego was so wrapped up in continuing to receive all that approval and adoration that it would never let him stop or enjoy any of it. And he remained kind of in this competitive mindset with people. And I would see people that, rose up and he would kind of push them away if he felt like, their success was starting to eclipse his own. And so in some ways I learned what not to do, from seeing that and saying, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be happy for my friends or my students when they surpass me. And at some point, if it's not going to change what you drive and where you live and where you go on vacation, where your kids can go to college, I mean, at what point are we tying it to that number anymore? Just so we can leave a larger amount of money to probably ruin our kids anyway. I mean, at some point, I think it's just all ego. And I think it's very easy to give into the ego. And I felt that temptation myself because I started out so poor and I grew up without money, that then when you start to have success and all of a sudden everybody, is interested in you and everybody wants to talk to you and everybody wants to be your friend. I just saw how kind of addictive that could become. And I didn't want those types of like false drivers and false friendships and so forth to be kind of something that enslaved me to just always needing more.
Yeah. And when you started, did you have a set goal in mind of, hey, when I have kids, I'm going to quit? Or was there some life event? Obviously having kids was that life event, but was there something else that happened where you're like, hey, I'm going to take off? Because I know like even what you're saying right now, when I got started, my goal, it was a very small goal. It was like, I wanted to surpass my W-2 income in cash flow, which was $12,000 a month. And I did that. And to me, I thought I'm going to like work 3 hours a day once that happens. And I had the whole ego, like I love making money problem, and continued going. And sometimes I look at my life now, I'm like, it kind of would have been cool to just stop at $12,000 a month and relax and work out and hang out with the kids, and instead of grinding for more and more and more. So did you have this strong, I guess, why in mind when you started of like, hey, I want to work my way up to this, so when I have kids, I can quit? Or did it just kind of happen naturally?
I had a goal to make $100,000 a year passively. And in my mindset, I just thought, well, when you take into account that it's all, I don't want to say tax free, but tax deferred because of our depreciation, you get to keep all of the money. I thought, well, that's basically like making 200 grand, if I had a regular job, because half of it would have gone to the IRS. And I thought, like, what could I not have that I would need for $200,000 a year if I were like a W-2 employee somewhere? And it got to a point, when the kids came along where I would make, well over that number, every month. And I just realized like there's not any justification anymore, because it was just something about that was my annual goal. And I make that in a month. And if I'm in a year where I have a lot of fees or I'm putting a lot of deals together, I might make that in, a week. And it just felt like this is almost, it wasn't close. It was like I went way, way past anything that would have been reasonable as far as moving that goalpost. And then, like I've heard you say this, Brandon, on the show before, because I'm a fan as well. And I've heard you say sometimes you think some of the happiest moments you and Heather had were like when you were in that smaller apartment, earlier, less wealth. And I have memories like that too. And I think I just I recognized at that moment with the kids being born that there was no debate. I didn't have to stop and think about it. I didn't have to worry about it. It was just, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt looking at them that this is what my life is about now. And I think part of it too is I grew up really not having parents that were active in my life. My father wasn't there. My parents split up when I was 2. And so I didn't know my real dad. I've never known my real dad. He's passed away since that time. I later found out. And so he wasn't around. And then with my mother, she worked all the time. So she was never home. And I would hang out with my friends and do whatever I basically wanted, which sounds cool, until it isn't. And I just didn't want that for my kids. And I felt like this is a no-brainer. Like there's no amount of money that's going to make me a better dad. What's going to make me a better dad is that I'm home. Plus, I will say that probably I wasn't a great model for work-life balance before that. I was one of these guys working just, if I even told you how much I worked, you just wouldn't believe me. It was so ridiculous. I mean, just ridiculous. So I knew I couldn't do that anymore for sure. And I just thought as long as I'm at it, plus, the market, I mean, we were in a seller's market. Yeah. Prices to me were nuts. And I just thought I'd be crazy not to take advantage of this. It's going to go back the other way sooner or later. So unless I want to wait that out for a whole nother cycle, I'm out, man. So
do you wish you would have stayed in a few years longer? Like you made it to 2020 so you could have got that appreciate. I mean, because the market just kept going for
a lot of
longer
than
we all expected it to.
But let me tell you why no. I'm really happy I did it when I did it is because of 2 reasons. The first reason is those first 5 years before my kids started school were magical. Like I just had all the time to do everything. And you don't ever get that back. I mean, once they go to school, it's a whole different world. You're a lot less important. And then once they get after school activities, you're even less important, as I have found out, which is not a fun realization as a dad, but it's a true thing. And so that time too precious to say, well, if I could have exited later, I would have had X number more dollars, which would now be irrelevant to our lifestyle anyway. The second reason I would tell you is that when you build up a portfolio like I did of like 6,000 units, you don't just get to kind of wave a magic wand one day and sell them all in one fell swoop. I mean, I guess that could happen if Blackstone comes along and says, I'll just buy them all. But that wasn't what I experienced. I experienced, putting them on the market. And granted, the brokers do all of that work for you, but it just takes time to unwind that portfolio. And I think too many people try to time the market perfectly, not realize by the time they liquidate a portfolio like that, they're going to have kind of missed their timing. So I think, leaving some meat on the bone for the next buyer and letting them feel like, hey, there's still room for this thing to go up further in value. And that also gives you time to go through those dispositions. I wouldn't do that any differently.
Yeah, that's really good, man. Really good. And something I've considered a lot too. And, just thinking through this, like, okay, I've got enough now. Like I've got more than enough. I could retire right now. I could sit out and do nothing. But that doesn't sound fun to sit out and do nothing. And so like, how did you feel during retirement? Then we'll go back and get your story, but how did you were you bored? Did you find hobbies? Were you just playing pickleball every day? Like, what did you do during that time when you sat 10 years, retired?
Well, it went through a few stages. So like, I would say from maybe 6 months, it was like, if you've ever tried to just, follow that practice, like in the Deepak Chopra book, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, and just not speak for any length of time, where your head is just going crazy. Like, I need to talk, was the same thing with me. Like, I need to work. So it was very hard for maybe 6 months to kind of break that. And then there was a period of, the subsequent duration, I guess 4.5 years, that first 5 years before the kids started school, that I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. I mean, I was very busy with the kids, a super active dad. And I feel like that was, my focus and my reward. And I'm not looking back on that time going, man, I was just so bored. No, they kept me very busy, doing everything with the kids. And I feel like my wife and I also use that time. We've traveled quite a bit. And, when you travel with young kids, that's its own adventure, as well. So all that was going on. However, kids start school. Holy crap. Retirement sucks. Because now, what do you do all day? And I feel like I probably should have, once they went back to school or once they started school, I should have right then said, okay, what am I doing now? Let me find something productive. But because my mindset was so set that, hey, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad in college and I read all these other books, and I thought, you're going to create all this passive income, financial independence, and then you're done. And that was like the whole point. And once you're there, you should stay there. In my mind, I couldn't switch gears back to, maybe I didn't know what I was talking about. So I was stubborn. And so I stayed in that position for a long time. And it was, really last year, right at about the 10-year mark, that I started thinking about like how little time I even have with the kids now during the week when school is in session. And it kind of hit me one day. My wife and I were at the Avalon Diner, not too far from our house, just a little breakfast diner place that we go to. They serve breakfast all day, which I love. And we were sitting there, and we've been there for like 2.5 hours because it was just killing time until it was time to go pick up the kids. And we're playing Wheel of Fortune on the app on her phone. And, I look around the diner and I'm like, hon, everybody here's like 70, 80 years old. Like, what are we doing? Nothing against people that are 70, 80 years old. But I mean, she was at the time 38 and I was at the time 45 or a year older now. And it just felt like, wow, the kids are turning 10. So we're going to have, another, nearly another decade of doing this before they're out of the house and we could really just travel and go wherever. Because otherwise you got to be there for all the stuff, right? All the volleyball and jiu-jitsu and soccer. But when those activities have practices after school, there's this long window of time. And Brandon, I will tell you, it was so destructive in so many ways to my fitness and my health and my motivation. It even started to affect my relationship. You find yourself arguing about the dumbest stuff because you just have nothing to do. It's like when you said that this morning before you took the kids to school, the way you said it was kind of blah, 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 blah. And the other person's like, what are you talking about? Like, no, you know what I'm talking about. You go back and forth. Like, I would not even have noticed that or remembered it 30 seconds later if I had something productive, I had purpose and something to go do. But when you're just kind of hanging out all day, playing Wheel of Fortune and, killing time, I mean, you can only work out so much. And you get to a point where you realize that you're becoming an unhappy person during this time that's supposed to be the reward for all the hard work that you put in. So that made me kind of wake up and go, all right, let me look about getting back in the game.
Cool, man. Well, I want to get to the second half of your journey here in a little bit, kind of like where you're going now that you're rebuilding. But I want to go back first to the very beginning, to that first rental and even before that. But before we do, one thing on the show we do kind of different is we send all the profits from the show, from the ads, directly to a charity of the guest choosing. So for this episode, where are we sending money from this episode? Who do you want to support?
So the Warrior Health Foundation. These guys, Brandon, are the coolest dudes. Like, I would love to have you at one of their fundraisers sometime. It's a charity that helps special operations, veterans with all the care they need and kind of dealing with invisible wounds and visible ones as well after their service. Unfortunately, these days, we have more soldiers that have committed suicide following their service than names on the Vietnam Wall. It is very, very sad. And when you get out here and you meet these guys, I mean, I will not tell stories around them because my stories suck. I mean, these guys, we're talking SEAL Team 6, Delta Force operators, like just unbelievable guys that have done so much to give us the freedom to do what we do that we wouldn't be able to do if they hadn't served our country. So I love giving back to them. And this charity helps them to, just kind of get right physically and mentally following their service because the VA just doesn't give them all the benefits that they deserve. And so I'm really passionate about that charity. And if you ever have a chance to come out to one of their fundraisers, you would absolutely love it. They're just the coolest guys.
That'd be amazing. It'd be amazing, man. I love that. And I love your heart towards that. So very cool. All right, so picture this. I just signed a lease with a tenant. They seemed great on paper. Then a few months in, everything kind of started going sideways. Suddenly, they're missing rent deadlines. There's a broken window. The neighbors are complaining about them. I realized I'd put someone in my rental property without properly screening them. And now I was living a landlord's nightmare. But lucky for you, you don't have to make the same mistakes as I made early on because you have the luxury of using TurboTenant. So if you're managing any rental properties right now, and you're still trying to vet tenants and collect rent and keep track of work orders and market all your vacancies, look, TurboTenant is going to be your best friend. It's an app that allows you to do all of that and so much more, all in the same platform. Plus, it's like stupid cheap, like seriously less than your Netflix subscription. I don't even know why it's so cheap. And if you want it even cheaper, I got a discount for you. Just go to turbotenant.com/betterlife and use code Brandon10 for 10% off. Or go to my Instagram and DM me the word toolbox, and I'll send you a link to a bunch of cool free tools that they have, like the rent estimator, financial freedom calculator, and more. Hey, so many of you have heard me tell that story about how I bought my daughter Rosie a fourplex, like a rental property, the week she was born, and how we put it on an 18-year, mortgage payoff plan so it'll be paid off when she graduates from high school. So essentially, my tenants are paying for Rosie's entire college. Now that's pretty awesome, right? Not to mention, it's also making almost like $1,000 a month in cash flow. That's double awesome. But I don't think I've ever shared really exactly how I found that deal. So here goes. I found it through direct mail marketing. And here's how. I simply built a high quality lead list of a lot of names and addresses of potential sellers, and I sent out a whole bunch of mail to every person on that list. And then I talked on the phone to a ton of people, and then I finally got one person that was interested enough to sell me the property, and I got a deal at a great price. So building that giant lead engine like that, I mean, it works, but it takes a ton of time, knowledge, and effort, which can really slow down an investor's growth, which is why I reached out to my friend Ryan with Ballpoint Marketing. I asked him to sponsor this show because they're the best at doing everything that I just talked about. Like, they're literally going to help you build your entire lead engine. You're going to get a one-on-one call where they're going to help you figure out what you want and then build your lead list for you. Their robots are going to handwrite the postcards with a real pen, which is super cool. They're going to send them out, and they'll even answer the phone calls for you. Plus, they'll help you track it all inside of a CRM that they create for you. I know, it's crazy, crazy awesome. And it's going to help you land way more deals consistently. And because you're awesome and because you listen to this show, you're going to get a discount when you tell them that I sent you, or just use code Brandon when checking out with them. I love Ballpoint Marketing and officially recommend them to all my friends and masterminds. So if you're ready to kick your deal flow up a notch, getting more quality leads without pulling your hair out, just go to ballpointmarketing.com/betterlife. Or just shoot me a DM on Instagram with the word ballpoint, like one word, ballpoint, and I'll hook you up with them directly. All right, Trey, so let's go back and talk about how you got into this. So I know you as a real estate investor. I know you as a husband, as a father, as a member of the 50. So thanks for being part of my little club and hanging out with me every few months. I know you as a phenomenal multifamily operator and as somebody that I would consider a personal mentor of mine, somebody who's given me advice. And I would say I don't say this lightly, that you changed my life. Even at that one conversation at the 50 last month, 2 months ago, that conversation I think will forever be like a pivot moment in my life. So that's how I know you. But let's go back before all of that. Before all that, who was Trey Stone?
First of all, thank you for what you just said. It means a lot. And I consider you a mentor too, as you know, with me peppering you with questions all the time. Thank you. You know, when I got started in real estate, it was really a function of me just trying to find, you know, kind of a path that was different than what I saw growing up. I grew up in a neighborhood where it wasn't safe to walk to and from school. Frankly, I got beat up a lot, and you know, I had several friends that sadly were murdered in high school, and it was just kind of a rough neighborhood. And I earned a full academic scholarship, so that got me out of the neighborhood and got me up to the University of Texas at Austin. And while I was there, I knew I wanted to major in business, but I really had no idea, you know, what aspect of business. Everybody said accounting was like a guaranteed job, but both my parents have degrees in accounting, and I didn't want to be my parents. And I also didn't see that they had necessarily results. And I say parents, I mean my stepfather and my mother. And I just didn't see that they had the results that I wanted. So I felt like I would go finance because I thought, well, maybe that'll kind of lead into maybe investment banking or something that could be more lucrative. And along the way, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I don't know if you remember this, Brandon, but there was a late night infomercial and it was always on TV in the middle of the night. I remember because it was back when Pizza Hut used to have that big New Yorker special. And it was like $9.99 for this gigantic pizza. And I would order that thing and always see this late night infomercial. I think like the pizza commercial would generate the interest for me to order the pizza. And then I'm in a good mood with all the sugar from that or whatever from carbs. And then I'm watching this late night commercial for Carlton Sheets. No money now. You remember that? They out there in like the little Hawaiian shirt by the pool and the whole thing. And I thought, well, that sounds perfect. I have no money. So, you know, maybe I could get started doing that. So I ordered that course and proceeded to try to do everything in it. And I was really struggling, you know, to get a deal done following his system. I'm sure growing up the way I did, just I was saying all the wrong things and, you know, didn't know how to approach sellers. And I was talking with my professor about it at the University of Texas. And he was, you know, someone who taught different classes. He taught classes in accounting, taught classes in real estate, in the business program up there. And he has been my professor a couple of different courses, became friends a little bit. And I said, look, you know, what do you think I should do with this? You know, I know you've done real estate of some kind. You've talked about it in class. And he said, well, I have one rent house left over from back when I was still doing single family, and I'm past the depreciation schedule on it. I've owned it longer than the 27 and a half years, which I didn't know what he was talking about. So, so you've owned it a long time. Great.
Yeah.
So, he basically said, look, I'll finance the whole thing to you. You don't have to put any money up. And I was like, well, that sounds too good to be true. Let's do it. So that was my first experience with a rent house. And I proceeded to make a lot of mistakes, and I would continue to ask him for advice. And he continued to kind of take me under his wing, and he asked me to come out to his house. And Brandon, have you ever been out to Westlake Hills in Austin?
No.
So he lived on Pascal Lane, which they called CEO Lane. And like the CFO of Dell and several other big technology companies lived on this street. And it's kind of perched up on these hills overlooking Lake Austin, and that part of Lake Austin where it kind of looks like a river and just like flows by kind of in curves. And he had an elevator in the house, and on one level outside he had a putting green, another one was a pool, another one was a sport court. And he took me out with his family, and we went to their country club. And I'm like, how are all these kids just walking up on these golf carts and getting food and stuff? They don't have to pay for it. He's like, well, no, we have an account. I was like, oh, I didn't know anything about how country clubs worked. I was like, are they stealing it? What's going on?
Yeah,
And
I still don't know how they work.
Yeah, well, just opened up my eyes to this whole thing, and I was blown away. And like a rude, dumb teenage college kid, I said what I can't believe now I said, which is, aren't you like a teacher? How do you afford all this? And he kind of laughed at me, and he pointed off in the distance because we were in the backyard. And he said, you see that building down there with the circle thing on it? And I said, yeah, it's a Frost Bank Tower. I work at a bar just to the side of that for $7 an hour with no health insurance. So doing security. So yeah, I know what it's like to get
You
beat
were a
up.
bouncer?
Yeah, I was a bouncer at the time while I was in college.
I totally can see that, man. That's awesome.
I was trying to put what tools I had to work, and
there you go.
In hindsight, $7 an hour to fight for no health and with no health insurance is probably not like a great, financial reward situation, but you do what you got to do. And he said, well, I built that tower with H. Ross Perot, who I remembered from his presidential run. And I was kind of like, oh, wow. And he said, I teach because I love doing it, but I made my money in commercial real estate. And so that kind of got me thinking, oh, wow, this could be what I would do next. So I bought that first property from him and just kept going from there.
That's awesome, man.
Amazing. So did you buy, so was that a single family house that you started with?
One little rent house off East MLK in Austin. I'm sure that area now is expensive, but back then that was kind of the hood in Austin, as much as Austin really has a hood. And, it was kind of scary to me at the time, especially since the whole thing was financing.
Yeah. And how does somebody like you go from, and I know there's so many pieces to this story, but from one single family house to now 6,000 units?
Yeah, well, that's a long story, but I can give you the highlights, I guess. I kind of went through a phase of just trying to buy more single family homes. And I realized that one of the main ways that people got into more single family properties was creative financing. And around that time, I was graduating college. And there was a big refi boom that was affecting the mortgage industry. This is maybe like around 2000, 2001. And it kind of took off that industry. And so everybody I knew and their dog was going in the mortgage industry. And I thought, well, not only could I make money, but this will be like a way for me to learn more of this financing stuff. And maybe that'll lead to me being able to buy more rent houses because I'll figure out some creative stuff that maybe only people that are in the mortgage business would know. So I went into that business. And in that process, I met not only serial real estate investors that I wound up being their go-to mortgage broker for their houses, but I met my first couple of clients that allowed me to finance their apartment complexes. And I feel bad for them in hindsight because I had no clue what I was doing. It was like an amazing thing that I ever closed any of those loans. I'm sure I did just a horrific job, but luckily they didn't know enough to know that how bad I sucked at it. And so I just kept shopping those loans. And I didn't get a lot of help from the parent company I was working with on the single family side because they didn't do commercial, but you didn't have to be licensed to broker commercial loans. I was just doing this on my own, cold calling banks and trying to find a home for these loans. So I kind of got a crash course at that time in the financial statements for multifamily and the underwriting requirements and DSCR and how different that is from debt to income ratio for a single family loan. And what those differences were by trying to place those notes from people that didn't know any better, that they probably should have hired someone more experienced. But I did close a couple of different loans that way for people. And one of those clients who actually had the winning bid to the 11th hour when the bank retraded him. So then he didn't go with my services. He went with another broker, but we stayed friends. And he kind of took me under his wing and said, "Hey, why aren't you doing apartments?" And I was like, "Because I'm broke, dude. Like, I'm doing houses. That's all I can afford." And he was like, "No, you should start doing apartments like tomorrow." And I said, "Well, how would I do that?" He's like, "Well, you just raised the money from other people. You saw that I had other people in my deal." And I said, "Well, why would they trust me? You're already a rich guy. You're putting $1 million into the deal. So of course they're going to trust you." And he said, "Well, I'll show you how to do all of it." And he jokes with me to this day that he didn't realize like what he was getting himself into, because like next morning, like 7 a.m., I'm calling like, "Okay, what do I do first? Do I meet you at the property? Like, what's going to happen next?" And I followed him around like a puppy dog for the first 2 years of my career and just kind of absorbed. And he would give me anything he could to like get rid of me, but I would just keep coming back and coming back. And so that's kind of how I learned, and then eventually did my own deal.
So I got a few general questions that might help people listening. That I think that you'd be good to answer these ones. I feel we should call it like the mentorship hour here on the podcast or something, but it'll be like less than an hour. All right. First of all, do you think someone should start with multifamily, or should they start with single family if they're newer to real estate?
I think it depends on their circle. So let's say that you're in a situation where you're like I was. You're starting with nothing. You don't really have anybody that's willing to lend you money or invest equity with you. I think obviously single family is the way to go. And to this day, I know single family investors that have done very, very well until they stepped into multifamily. And then they wound up actually not doing well in multifamily and kind of regretted it. So single family can be a great vehicle all the way through financial independence and retirement. You don't necessarily ever need any other vehicle. Depends on what your goals are. Other people, though, I see them coming in, and I've had clients over the years that would come in and they'd have, a few $1 million in their IRA and, other portfolio investments, and be later in their career and trying to set themselves up for retirement. They're like, I think maybe I could take the risk to buy one rent house. And I'm looking at their financial statement, and I always have people prepare both an income statement and a balance sheet as if they were a business before I meet with them and consult with them. And I'm looking at their cash flow from W-2 and from their other investments, and I'm going, this rent house deal that you want to go do, if it's a home run, is like less than a 1% difference to your overall income and net worth. Like that's not going to get you anywhere. So for those people, it just makes sense to dive right in, with a larger asset. And then there's people in the middle that I've seen where they come in, they do have some money, they have some experience, they don't have enough money to go do their own, larger multifamily deal. But because of the related skill sets or related experience, there's someone that I kind of feel like if I were to be mentoring them, or someone was, that people around them would trust them and they could actually put up some skin in the game too, where they could go ahead and just jump in. And for the very first deal, bring in other people with them. So their resources and their circle coming into it, I think determines that. I think that if all else were equal, then you had infinite resources, without a doubt, multifamily.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, I got a few more for you. And by the way, Cam, I'm hogging the mic, so because I'm just drilling Trey on all these things. But if you have anything, just cut me off.
Yeah.
How about your ideal market? How should somebody find a good market? And then I want to get into your like where you've all invested, but how should somebody pick a market, do you think?
I think that one of the most important things that people overlook is that you really want to have a large supply of renters that are at a reasonable price point. I think a lot of people want to go out and they want to buy these trophy properties. They see successful real estate investors, maybe Donald Trump or something, with these trophy properties, and they think, oh, that's where the money's at. But the truth is, those deals, you have a lot of competitors that have really low cost of capital, that have tremendously deep pockets and resources and technology and teams. So you're competing against people that are very sophisticated, and the tenants that you're pursuing are in a much smaller number in those luxury properties as well. So not only is the competition tougher, but the supply of qualified tenants for those properties is very, very low. I don't recommend that as people first get in the business. And for me, even been in the business a long time, I just don't think that's the easiest way to make money. What I feel like is if you pick a metro where you have nice population density, you have ongoing job growth, which then drives ongoing population growth. And that's going to drive appreciation at your property. It's going to drive rental growth at your property. And now you've got a steady supply of what I would consider to be workforce housing and workforce housing tenants. What I find is that at the higher end properties, you don't have the same margin of safety because you've got to pay a much higher price at a lower cap rate, and you're trying to fill these with these Class A, tenants. And it's just a very difficult business to have enough margin, in my opinion, especially if you're going to try to make money as a syndicator like I do. and still have enough margin left over for your passive investors to be really happy as an LP with what they're getting. So I think metros with those characteristics, job growth, population growth, high population density, and a large pool of kind of what I would call upper middle class workers that are maybe not, we're not talking about affordable housing subsidized deals necessarily. And we're not talking about the class A stuff. I'm talking about workforce housing. Maybe you're buying a C that you can make it into a solid B, for example. To me, that's just your perfect spot to be in for, safety. No matter what happens in the market, those properties tend to stay full and do well.
Yeah. What is your favorite markets right now?
I mean, I'm biased because I live in Houston, and it also happens to be the largest apartment market, in America. And I've served as president of the Houston Apartment Association. So I'm very familiar with it. I've owned units in every nook and cranny of the city. What I love about it is that it's the largest market, number one. Number two, I find that because we are either number one and number two, one of those two slots on almost every major metric that you could have, whether it's job growth, population growth, affordability, diversity, like you name it, we hit all those boxes. And so I'm not saying that's the only place to invest, but for me, I just don't really have to look elsewhere because there's such a massive abundance of product here. And because of the depth of my relationships, doing it for 26 years in the same city, I have the ability to find off-market deals at a great price. And then I know exactly how to operate them, what my numbers are going to be. I don't even really bother to look at the seller's numbers because I'm not going to run the property the way they did. And that's how well I know my market. But, if people live near a major metro that has similar metrics to that, I don't like states that don't have friendly landlord-tenant laws. So if I lived in California or New York or New Jersey, I really don't care how good the deal is. I'm not buying it. If I lived in one of those places, first of all, I'd probably move. But if I didn't move, I probably wouldn't invest in those areas. But if you live in a place where you have good landlord-tenant law that's friendly to you as a landlord, where you don't have to sit there with somebody not paying you rent and you can't get them out of your unit, which is just so unfair, right? And it's also taking housing off the market that hardworking Americans need at an affordable price point for someone who's not paying the rent. And then, the whole property starts to downward spiral and everybody suffers. I think finding a market where you can find that type of housing, but also have those friendly laws that are going to allow you to hold people accountable for whether they pay you or not. That's really the key to success. And for me, Houston has had me covered. I could buy 50,000 more units to still be in the Houston market. I wouldn't need any other markets to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, you bring up such a great point about the expertise and like depth within a market, where even for a new investor or experienced anybody, like I think people make the mistake often of just like, I'm going to look over this giant area. Like I invest in Texas, or I invest in, the Southeast. That's fine, but you won't get that level of like connections and networking and wholesalers or whatever if you're just everywhere. The more focused you are, again, you don't want to be like, I invest in, podunk, middle of nowhere, where like, there's 12 houses and a gas station. Like obviously that there's a problem there. But if you can get a big enough city that has the landlord tenant laws that you like and the laws that go, just go deep, like go deep in that. Cause you're not going to have trouble getting enough in one market, but if you try to go everywhere, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting enough because you just can't get them.
Yeah.
Man, you know where I learned that? Years ago, when I was broke, I would go to Barnes & Noble and I would read all these books on real estate, entrepreneurship, self-help and all that. And I would never buy them. I would just read them at the Barnes & Noble, then put them back on the shelf because I couldn't afford it.
Me too. I love that you did that.
And I would leave like little markers in the book to know where I was at. And I would go back and sure enough, the marker would still be there so I could pick up where I left off. I mean, in hindsight,
I love it.
Anyway, but I would do that. And there was this one particular book called The Real Estate Finance and Investment Manual. And it was the most boring, god-awful thing I have ever read in my entire life. I think it was some kind of textbook for like a MBA real estate program or something. It was horrific. And it was like I was determined to not give up, that I was going to finish this thing. To this day, I only remember one thing that I got out of that whole, and I mean, it's like this thick, tiny print, front and back. I mean, just ridiculous, right? But one thing it said in the book, and it explained it so well, is that if you don't develop expertise, and like you just said, they use the word depth of knowledge in a specific market that forwards and backwards, everything about it, then your risk is so much higher. Because
Mm.
when you're looking at Houston, even for example, when I see people from out of town buying in Houston, on a map, these two properties might look like, hey, they're basically right next to each other, same part of town. What I know being a native Houstonian is that there's
Yep.
this invisible line between those two
Mhm.
properties, north of this street or south of that street, where the demographics completely change, the crime completely changes,
Yeah.
the pattern of development or gentrification is totally different. And if you lack that local market knowledge, your risk is just so much higher. And so I
Yeah.
think it was so lucky for me that I
Yeah.
managed to like suffer my way through that book, and Barnes and Noble didn't kick me out for sitting there reading it for free, because I stuck to that. It just made so much sense to me. I was like, this has to be true. And
Yeah.
it has been for me.
I think that's so important for anybody that's listening to this right now, whether it's single family, multifamily, self-storage, whatever it is identifying a market and going all in on that market. And I know a lot of people don't do that, but whenever I talk to, I'm a single family guy, but whenever I talk to somebody that's like, I'm going to buy in St. Louis and Kansas City and Memphis, and I just see red flags all over the place, because what you said is exactly true, where one house, it can be the same exact house. Everything matches, square footage, beds, baths, and it can be less than a tenth of a mile away. And the difference in the ARV can be $150,000. And if you don't know your market like the back of your hand, and you're investing from out of state, you can lose so much money. And I see it happen all the
Yeah.
time. And so I think that's so, so important. One question I have for you though, Trey, because you were talking about just finding deals earlier in Houston, and part of that, I mean, knowing your market, all of the brokers, all of any of the off market stuff that's going on, but how you had to find a lot of deals to grow to 6,000 units. How did you find those deals?
So I know a lot of people that, have all these strategies where they're going out and they're, buying lists and they're sending
Mhm.
out mailers and doing all this kind of stuff. I'm sure that works well in certain settings, but for me, I always feel like our plate is already so full as lead investors putting these deals together, where you're trying to, not just find the properties, but underwrite all of them and then arrange your financing and line up your investors and go through
Mhm.
the plans with due diligence for the renovation, then executing that after closing, and investor relations and perpetuity, it feels like, afterwards until you sell the
Mhm.
property. And I'm just scratching the surface of property management. There's a million more things that go on there, accounting, you name it. And so there's so many things to do that it was never appealing to me to try to go out and source deals on my own. It felt
Mhm.
to me like if there's anything that I was going to outsource, talk about time intensive, driving around trying to find deals, see if they fit the profile. That just to me seemed like a terrible idea. So from day one, I started reaching out to brokers who promptly ignored all my calls and had no interest in working with me at all. Because when you first try to break into multifamily, they're like, Trey who? And just, I mean, literally, I couldn't get a call back. And I would just doggedly call the same brokers over and over and over until finally more than one of them told me, like, you're obviously not going to leave me alone until I have lunch with you. So fine, like, let's go to lunch. You're paying for it, but I'll talk to
Mhm.
you or come by the office or we'll have coffee, whatever. And so I just wouldn't give up. And then eventually, those brokers started to find out, oh, he closed a deal. So now all of a sudden they want to talk to me a little bit more. And then all of a sudden I closed another deal. They want to talk to me more. Then I bought 7 more deals at the same time. And then all of them wanted to talk to me. And those same brokers that ignored my calls at that time, here I am 26 years later. I mean, I've talked to them this week. It's the same people. And there's a
Mhm.
handful of people, even though we're the largest apartment market in America, it's the same handful of people that move 90% of the product that is within my
Yeah.
niche.
Mhm.
So it's just a matter of like, you have to have the perseverance not to give up in building those relationships. And then you got to do what you say you're going to do. You
Yeah.
can't be a liar. You have to demonstrate integrity. And if you do that, then over time, your credibility just grows and grows and grows. The people that build those relationships, but then, act in a way where they damage their credibility, now those relationships work against them because, like, oh, I know you. You're that guy that never does what he says he's going to do. And then you'll
Yeah.
never get a deal again in that city because you're locked out of those 5 people or 6 people that do 90% of the deals, right? So it's a two-edged sword. But if you carry yourself with some integrity, and don't commit to things you're not sure you'll be able to do, and just manage expectations in that way, then once you break into that, there's always deals that are trading in these larger markets.
Yeah.
There's a good principle to pull out here. We talk in business books, talk about the 80-20 rule a lot, right? Like 20% of your or was it 80% of your output comes from just 20% of your inputs, right? So like 20% of the pea pods in a garden produce 80% of the peas, right? So the idea, you're saying 90% of the broker or 10% of the brokers probably do 90% of the transactions at in that city. You find that across real estate. I see it all the time, especially like how many real estate agents are in America? I mean, million plus real estate agents.
Imagine, yeah.
Like probably 1% do 90% of all the transactions. So when you're getting into real estate or trying to find whatever, it's a insurance or a appraiser or whatever, like the 80-20 rule and sometimes the 90-10 or the 99-1 rule applies across the board. So you want to work with those people who are the best, not the person who just, oh yeah, my brother-in-law's an agent, he can do it. Like my sister's a lender, she can handle it. Or I met a lender at the mall today. Okay, but are they the ones doing the work? Like if we want to be with who are the 80-20? Who's the 20% doing 80% of the work and like work with those people? It's probably something I wish I could go back and tell my 25-year-old self is to focus on those people doing all the work, and I'd be a lot further along.
Yeah.
Hey
All
Trey,
I can say is I was very blessed and fortunate that my mentors told me that early on. So I just realized that I think the way I said that earlier, I kind of took credit like I had some great wisdom. No, I had some people that I knew that owned apartments. They're like, what are you kidding me, Trey? Like, you're never going to find the good deals anyway. You're going to find the leftover crap that we don't want to buy because it's overpriced on LoopNet. You need to have brokers, and those brokers are going to be the key for you. So anyway.
Very cool, man. Well, hey, so on the way to like 6,000 units, like where were you getting the money for that? I mean, like how did you start raising? I'm assuming you raised capital, but how did that go on that journey?
So it was really tough at first. I mean, I would accept people for $5. I mean, not quite, but in the big scheme of 6,000 units, looking back, it feels like $5. Like I literally had investors for $5,000-$10,000 in the beginning. Also, bear in mind, I was fortunate that when I get started, and this is kind of a big, I think, gotcha of some younger investors today when they talk to people like me that have been doing it a long time, is in fairness, the properties were a lot cheaper per door, and the leverage was a lot more aggressive back at that time. Prior to the great financial crisis, I mean, to give you an example, I once bought, 7 pretty large apartment complexes from one guy, from Corey Thabit with IMT Residential. That was, a couple thousand units of my early portfolio. So a big chunk of my earlier portfolio. And I was able to get all that financed at 110% of purchase price. So,
wow.
Not only were the prices of the properties much lower on a per unit basis, but the flexibility. So for example, when I put together my loan packages, of course, also being a former mortgage broker, I would line everything out with every imaginable thing in the kitchen sink. So it would have purchase price, rehab, closing costs. Everybody's heard of those. But then I would have working capital, utility deposits, every imaginable thing in there that now they would laugh at you if you wanted those to be eligible costs in your capital stack for a lender. They're like, you can stop at purchase price and rehab, and that's it that they're going to look at. But back then, and when I first got in the business, I guess 04, 05 with multifamily, or, in the 90s with single family, they were willing to underwrite off of all those other costs as long as they were sourced through the sources and uses at closing. So they were either coming from debt or coming from you. So my total down payment out of that overall capital stack was 10%. But if you looked at it just against purchase price, again, my loan was roughly 110% of the purchase price. So that made things easier for me, to be fair. I think sometimes people want to kind of have this generational fight when they talk about housing, especially people talking about the price of, your first home these days. And they always like, in all the little stuff on social media, it's like, yeah, all right, boomer, who bought your house for like a stick of gum and a 2% mortgage or whatever. And now it's like $1 million for a 2-bedroom house or something, depending upon where you live, like where you live, Brandon, for sure it is. As Cam knows all too well from buying one from you. But where I'm going with this is that, to be fair, I didn't have to raise as much money to buy that volume of units at that time. But I did have to bring in investors because I didn't really have any money of my own. So what I did was, in my first couple of deals, I did it for free. I put the whole deal together and I didn't charge my investors a dime. And I just said, look, you're not going to pay for my education. And I actually kind of borrowed whatever money I could from friends, family, whoever, so I could scrape together what, might have only been $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per deal, those first few deals. But if you looked at my balance sheet, that money, I had a negative net worth at the time, was more money to me than 100 grand was to a lot of those investors that were coming to the deal. So they knew like this guy is all in. And, I had a mentor tell me one time years ago when I worked in the fitness industry, in the gym business, he said, selling is a transfer of enthusiasm from one person to another. And then closing is asking for the money. And man, did I transfer enthusiasm. Like I was so freaking excited. Like it was just, I feel like some people, Brandon, they probably just gave me the money so I would shut up and let them out of my office. I was just that crazy with it. But people would do it. And little by little, as my early deals did well, and then I was able to return all the capital with refis, and they still had equity in the deal and they still had cash flow, but now they had their principal back. They could turn around, reinvest with me again. They would tell other people, those people would tell other people. I also, this is really going to show how old I am, but I started doing AM radio shows on a small local station. Yeah, that I could afford, because small local AM stations, if you can imagine that, are pretty cheap. And I would go on there and I would talk, and I would just talk about real estate. I would have people on the show that had invested with me. I would have people on the show that were vendors of mine, whether it was my mortgage broker or my GC or whoever. And that resonated with people. And I found that a lot of people were looking for an alternative that wasn't Wall Street because they didn't trust that. So by listening to that kind of long form content over AM radio, they would build up, trust, like a lot like people do with you, Brandon. Kind of, they feel like they already know you. I felt like I knew you before I ever met you, from all of this long form content that you have. So that's how people would kind of get to hear about me if it wasn't through referrals.
So then maybe we can pivot here. Now you're going back into real estate. I mean, pretty heavily. You're going back into the world of multifamily. So what are you doing different now? What is the AM radio for you today? Like, how are you raising capital? What's the plan? What are you looking to do?
Well, I will say that I came back in last year and didn't know that while I was pulling a Rip Van Winkle, that the world had changed. So I just went up to doing what I had done before. I rehired some employees that I had going back, 15, 16 years ago. One of them that I had hired the first time 21 years ago. And we started putting on seminars. That AM radio station we talked about, it's still around in Houston, Texas. And so we got back on that station. My employees did the show for me on the radio, and people started coming in, and they were coming to our educational seminars. And the idea was, learn about it a little bit first, kind of get over the, customer education curve, and then from there invest with me. And it was a complete and total disaster. I mean, just complete miserable failure. So like before, there weren't a lot of people doing that. And so there was no internet. I mean, I think there was internet and there was MySpace, but like we didn't have, the iPhone had not been invented. Facebook didn't exist. So it's just a totally different world. And you weren't getting a lot of investors off MySpace, I can tell you that. So, this AM radio thing worked well. And people coming in, they were like, we can't get this information anywhere else about how to invest in real estate and build passive income. And this is like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, but in real life with people I can talk to. And so it was a very unique thing. There were a small number of real estate investor associations around the country at that time. And so if you had one and that was a pool of legitimate real estate investors in the area that new people could come in and learn from, it was like printing investors. It was so easy to get people in. What I learned this last year getting the business is, now there's 1 million people that are offering real estate investing information, and they offer it online and for next to nothing. And so I had no clue that was the case. I still had my same old school program for thousands of dollars that you could come in and join and come to local meetings. And hey, you're out of town, no problem, just fly in, And people are like, so keep flying in. I'm like, well, yeah, what else would you do? Like, I don't know, use the internet, dummy. So I just was like not aware. I say it now realizing how stupid it sounds, but I didn't know that because I'd been out of the market for that long. And even though the last deal I bought, had been 10 years earlier, bear in mind that for the last several years before that, all those deals were funded with repeat investors. So I hadn't actually been recruiting new investors, in maybe 15, 16 years, really long time. And so the world has just changed so fast during that time that I kind of had to like crash and burn and go, okay, well, this isn't working. What do I do now? And I kind of looked around and realized, there's all these people that are raising money online. So social media has kind of become that source for us now. I mean, I had a guy the other day, I still can't believe this happens, but they come in and they'll see videos and stuff on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or X of me or my staff or my investors doing deals. they'll watch that. They'll maybe do a little bit of Google research, see what pops up, and then they'll respond, to an ad. And then lo and behold, like 3 days later, they're wiring me hundreds of thousands of dollars to go into a deal. And so it took me a little while to figure out that that's the way that you raise money now. And it's a little scary because I think, well, how many people could be making these videos and raising money that don't know what they're doing, or they're catfishing you from the Philippines or something? I mean, I've seen that catfishing show. I know it happens, right? So I just thought, gosh, no one's going to do this. But lo and behold, they are doing it. And the reality is now, with remote workers and with that type of setup, I've been able to raise more money at a lower overall cost and much less of my time than before. I think, gosh, what could I have done if this technology existed back then? And, Brandon, you're asking me the question, but the reality is that, when we went to these different events, and when I went last year, while I was in this discovery process coming back last year, I went and attended your event. And I really didn't just go to see you. I went because my buddy, Steve Rosenberg, was speaking at your event. Love Steve. Yeah, who doesn't? The guy's awesome. And I just want to hear him speak and support him. And I love his cause for Jet and everything. So I came out and I was like, hey, have you ever told Brandon about me? He's like, yeah, I've mentioned him to you. And I'm thinking like, did he really? So I saw you in a hallway and I'm like, hey, Brandon, you probably don't know who I am, but I'm Trey. And
dude, I had like 10 people. I've had like 10 people before I met you. Like, Trey, right? I'm like, I don't know Trey. You got to know Trey. Like everybody was like, you got to know this guy.
Well, I was nervous.
Your fame preceded you.
I thought you were like, stalker, leave me alone. So anyway, I go to the thing.
You have a reputation. Everyone's like, this guy's the coolest. You got to know him. Yeah.
Well,
it's a good reputation.
I'm fortunate in that regard. But yeah, so we went out and you had that great trade show floor. And, I met some members of your team with ODC and they're like, you should just talk to Brandon. I'm sure, he would help you. And, I was thinking like, yeah, but we're also kind of competitors. And like, I do that for the people all the time, but most people are not like that. Like, oh no, he has the abundance mentality too. It'll be fine. And then sure enough, you were kind enough to let your team, kind of help me get going. So, I mean, I know this may sound like a little bit like I'm blowing smoke up your skirt, but I mean, really, you and your team really kind of helped me move into this new century and get out of the horse and buggy that I was in and figure out this is the way it's done now.
That's cool, man. That's good to hear kind of the backstory. Yeah.
I mean, as you're growing, are you still looking at kind of the same type of investing that you did before? Or are you kind of switching gears at all? Or what does your second career look like?
This time around, I think what's nice about it is I don't really have some of the financial constraints I did when I started the first time. I'm well funded. I'm also not tied to a particular outcome as far as like the number of units or the amount of, revenue that we need to generate. And that was a big source of anxiety and stress for me the first time around. And it caused me to work in a way before that if I would have had kids, I would have been a horrible father. So this time around, I'm able to have some balance with that and keep up with, fitness and family and still be able to do it. So the big change for me is being able to do it in a way that actually is balanced and not really be in some massive hurry, because whether I buy one more deal or 100 more deals won't change anything in my life, from a lifestyle perspective. So this time around, I decided to pursue the same strategy, but just take a different approach personally to it and not put myself in that position where I was just going to work myself to death, because I'm not worried about trying to get out there in front of all the overhead to generate enough fees. Like, for example, I just recently turned down a deal that I had been looking at and, spent quite a bit of time and effort on it. And I know that my fees in the deal would have been around $3 million, but ultimately the numbers didn't work in my estimation for my investors, especially if I look at the range of worst case to best case scenario. And I'm not going to do a deal for fees. So I'm free to walk on deals like that. And not that I would have done a bad deal before on purpose, but I would have felt a lot more anxiety about walking away from a big fee. Now I have no anxiety about doing that at all. The last thing I want is a deal that's now going to be an albatross around my neck, for years after that, if it's not a good deal, because I know the back end of that investor relations piece. So I'm doing the same thing with small properties.
It's actually kind of like a dirty little secret of real estate syndication and commercial real estate is that once you start a syndication business, and I've been here and thankfully we've got pretty much we're out of it. But the dirty little secret of the syndication is that like you start a syndication business, you pay your bills for your team with the acquisition fees, which is fine, which is great. You buy a property, you get a couple % fee that keeps the lights on. but then you have to maintain that property for 10 more years, let's say 5 to 10 years to hold on to it. How do you pay your team's fee? You have to keep buying more deals in order to bring in more capital to then fund your team. And so syndication companies get trapped in this cycle of having to do deals, and you have to do deals. And when I'm not saying any syndicator, I'm sure there are, but I'm not saying any syndicator would do a bad deal just to get fees. But psychologically, if you knew you're going to go bankrupt and lose everything if you didn't do deals, you would tend to fudge the numbers. And so a couple of years ago at Open Door Capital, we saw this. We're like, oh, we don't want to be in this trap where we have to do them. So we just like buckled down. We let a lot of people go. We tightened up, and we said we had like a project name for it. Like it was like a mission, is where we call it evergreen. We need to be evergreen, which means we could buy nothing or we could buy 10 things in a year. Doesn't matter. We can pay the bills no matter what, just off of like property management fees, asset management fees on the existing portfolio. So we're just about there. I mean, we're at the point where we're there, or I could let like 2 more people go and then we're there, right? So like, and that would be fine. If we weren't buying anything, we don't need, whatever acquisitions team if we're not buying, or, capital raisers. So, but something for people to watch out is they're going to invest with somebody like a company. If you're going to invest with, an Open Door Capital or with you, Trey, it's like the thing that you have is you don't need to do deals. And so the chance of you doing a bad deal is so much less. It's just something nobody ever thinks about, but yeah, be careful who you invest with. Make sure they're not just doing it just to get fees.
Yeah, you're so right. And I feel like during the, last, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years, I still looked at a lot of deals, even though I was retired, but I did it, as favors to friends who would come to me, in some cases, former investors that were now investing with somebody else because I wasn't doing deals anymore, and said, I'll never have when it wins the next deal. Never. So I was like, they got to go find somebody else. And they would come and they would show me deals all the time. And, unfortunately, as I was looking at a lot of those deals, having been now through different market cycles and up and down, and having survived 08, 09, and going from tens of millions of dollars in positive net worth to, I guess 8 figures of negative net worth, kind of overnight, during that market cycle. And holy crap, all right, slowly put the gun back on the table, move all the sharp objects away. Like, how are we going to get through this? I've been through that before. And so when I look at those deals, I'd say, look, it just, in my opinion, stress testing the exit with a move in interest rates, that type of perspective where that your assumptions will potentially change between the time you acquire it, the time you dispose of it. I didn't see any deals that penciled. And even the people that were coming to me stopped coming to me because they got tired of me saying, no, you shouldn't do this deal. No, you shouldn't. They just thought, oh, Trey's just like negative Nancy. He's against every deal. And I started to think at some point, like, well, holy crap, maybe I'm just like a dinosaur, because I've bought a deal for $2,000 a unit. I've bought a deal for $8,000 a unit. I bought a deal for $12,000 a unit. I bought plenty of deals in the 20s and then all the way up, right? So I just thought, well, maybe my reference point, because I've been in business so long, has just, made me now too much of a grumpy old man, get off my lawn, like that I'm just never going to be able to tell somebody, yes, you should do it. And that's not good advice either, right? But then looking at what's happened in the market since then, I'm like, oh, no, I was correct. It was just a matter of time that they hadn't had that time in the business, and they hadn't been through all the assumptions of your underwriting changing. I've been through that before. So I knew that in underwriting, you have to have a range of scenarios where you move cap rate, you move interest rates. And when you started to apply that logic, those deals really didn't pencil. So I guess what I'm saying is that there is that temptation. I don't think people typically succumb to it in the way of like, well, I'll just do a bad deal and take my fees and whatever. I think what happens is that psychologically, syndicators want to syndicate. Developers want to develop. Like, whatever they do, those that are good with hammers think everything is a nail. They want to move forward with this. So as they're manipulating all of the very fungible assumptions within the underwriting model, they start to kind of make, some bad choices and how they rationalize how the underwriting is going to shake out, because what's driving that bias is the fact that they need to do that next deal, like what you said. So I definitely think having a syndicator that, just has the financial resources to pick and choose and not be under that pressure is a real key thing for LPs that are looking to vet a good lead investor or syndicator these days. And I will tell you, that's a tall order. There's not a lot of, lead partners that are in that position. And you, because of your other businesses, the wealth that you have been able to build long before you even got into multifamily, and me from having exited all those deals before, we're in a pretty small group of people that are in that position to both be a syndicator or run a syndication firm, and then at the same time not need that next deal. So I almost don't want to hold people to some unrealistic standard that other, lead investors couldn't live up to, because maybe that's not fair, but it's just an important bias, and not just for the LPs to consider. It's an important bias as a syndicator to kind of second guess yourself and make sure you take into account, like, am I biased in how I'm evaluating these underwriting criteria? And I think one of the best ways to avoid making that mistake as a syndicator is to have an old head, that you can go to that's been around for a while and go, hey, I'm thinking about buying this thing. These are my sets of assumptions. Tell me if I'm full of crap or not. And if you have somebody that'll be honest with you, you may not want to hear what they're telling you. But I had a guy at a meeting, a group investor meeting I held last year, a buddy of mine, Keith, and he stood up. I hadn't known he was going to do this. He just did this on his own. Stood in the middle of the group, and he said, I've invested in 4 deals now, 4 apartment deals. He said, the first couple of them, Trey said I'd probably be okay. The last couple, he said, no, you're chasing it and you're buying into, an up market. You're overpaying. I don't agree with the way that's being financed. Don't do it. He said, I thought, Trey's just so negative from before. He's had all these low cost basis deals and whatever. He said, I went and did it anyway. And holy crap, was he right? Those deals now are upside down and not performing. I don't say this to say I'm some sort of genius. I've just been around a long time. And the longer that you're around, the more you see those market cycles, you can anticipate that. But I think that's the key, is don't opinion shop. If you go to somebody as a mentor and they have that experience and they tell you, no, those assumptions don't pencil, then you have to take that news, whether you like it or not. If you're always opinion shopping, you're going to get the surgery.
Yep. There's a story I tell often, because this translates down to like a small deal too, is I had a house I wanted to flip. It was a duplex. And I was like, I'm going to turn it into a single family house. So I spent a year of my life working on it. But before that, I went to the hardman lender that I'd used multiple times before. I liked him. I trusted him. Smart guy, biggest lender in my area. I went to him and I said, this is the deal I want to do. And he said, no. He's like, it's too slim. It's not a good deal. I don't think ARV's right. It's a weird property. It's going to be hard to comp that thing. I'm not going to lend on it. You shouldn't do it. And I was like, screw you, man. And I went and found a bunch of I talked to other lenders and eventually got one lender just based on my enthusiasm alone. And he flat out said that. Like, he lent the money on it. That's the only flip I've ever lost money on, is because of that. It's because I didn't listen to the wisdom. My ego got in there and I was like, no, I know better. The irony is that I actually could have bought that, kept it as a duplex, and would have cash flowed like crazy, and it would have been a great investment. My plan, I was so fixated on flipping it, and I was so fixated on me being smart and knowing like what I'm doing, that it's the only flip I ever lost. I think I lost 15 grand, something like that. And, that was it. So yeah, it happens.
Grand to figure that out at the scale that you're at now. If you learned that lesson for 15 grand, that was a good investment, right?
Yeah.
So. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think there's a fear that we all have of like, maybe we don't all have, I have, where like when I was building Open Door Capital, and still to this day, like I should have gone more often to people like you, and I didn't know you at the time, but I should have been like, hey, what do you think of these things? And some of the deals are home runs that we're doing, and some of them are not home runs, and they're going to be a struggle for years to try to make them work. Maybe I would have not bought 1 or 2 of those had I talked to you. But it's like my ego got in there. Even at that point, I'm like, oh, I don't need to go ask other people. What do they know? They're just negative Nancy's. Same thing. And so I'm definitely learning that lesson over the last few years, is like, I need more smart people around me to be a little bit more negative Nancy, especially when you're like me, which I am an optimistic, guy. Like everything's great and it's always going to work out, and every person has my best interests at heart, and the market will never go down. Like that's my heart wants to be like, it's all good. And so when you're like me, you need people around you to be like,
it's what everybody loves.
Challenge your assumptions.
Yeah, I feel like
everybody loves about you. So.
Yeah.
I feel like my stepdad for me has done so much for me on that, Brandon, because he worked as an accountant for a long time in the aerospace industry. So he was doing all the proposals for USA, United Space Alliance, and then later for Boeing for things like the rocket boosters. And so he's always running these really complex spreadsheet models. And so when I got into underwriting multifamily, he's like, oh yeah, this is my area. Let me get in that spreadsheet. And he would just rip everything to shreds, right? Like every deal was just doom and gloom, and this is disaster. So it got to a point where if I was kind of like a little on the fence about something, like I'd bring it to him, let him just crap all over it. And if after all of that, I can go back and take into account that feedback and figure out that I have a legitimate solution for the concerns that he was raising, well, then maybe the deal is worth doing. But if he was able to bum me out, then like, that's my sign. Like, if you can talk me out of it, don't do it, you know?
Well, this is the challenge, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like, this is a challenge with real estate, high level and low level, like just getting started all the way. You can second guess yourself on every single metric and get too conservative and then never buy anything ever, right? You're like, well, rents might not go up. So in fact, they might go down by like 5% a year. I mean, we saw that happen. So let's go negative rent growth for the next 10 years. And, I think, repairs are a lot, but man, we could go through another inflationary thing. So I think we should double our repair costs. You can do that to every number on a line item. You'd be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, and it's all assumptions. And so there's how do you find that balance? Again, speaking for newbies or experienced people, how do you find the balance of being real and not overshooting or undershooting your numbers?
Well, I think you have to look at the source of the data. To me, I'm a finance major, so it comes down to the numbers for me. And I feel like if the source of your data is based on other assets. Let me give you an example. Getting back in the market recently, I kept, as you know, one large asset that makes me a lot of money. Like this last month I looked at it, made me 178 grand. I have no partners in it, just pure cash flow, 10 minutes from my house, owned it 19 years. So, not a whole lot left to do over there, right? But that's all fine and dandy, but that's a deal I bought 19 freaking years ago, right? Like what's that got to do with the market today? So I'm getting back in the market and I'm thinking, man, for all my assumptions about like revenue growth, like what you're talking about, also underwriting all the expenses, I don't have this big portfolio anymore to draw from. And a lot of my friends that had big portfolios that I got those numbers from for underwriting in the beginning to make sure that I have reference points that were legitimate, they're all retired, right? Because I was the youngest president of the Houston Apartment Association when I was president of that by like some ridiculous margin. Like, not because I'm special, but just because I was crazy enough to start young and broke. And most people actually waited to a little bit older, had a little bit more money. So the average new syndicator might be in like, say, their mid 50s at that time. And here I was doing it like in my, early 20s. So the point I'm making is that all my old heads had, retired, stepped out of the business that I learned from. I'm supposed to be the old head now, but I don't want to go in using my numbers from back in the day. So what I did, and this was my solution that maybe is a potential answer to your question, I called a buddy of mine, John Boryak, and I love John's story because he started out coming to my investor meetings when he was in high school. And it turns out that when he first started coming, he was maybe 15, 16, but I swear to God, I thought he was 11 or 12. Like he's one of those guys that looks like a lot younger than he is. And I walked over to his parents and they were doing their first ever multifamily investments at the time with any lead investor. And they were doing it with me. And I'm like, hey, I'm pretty laid back about stuff, even if it's theoretically a closed door partner meeting, but is that your son? Like, he's kind of like a little kid. Is he just like a school project? Like, why is he here? They're like, little kid. Like, no, he's in high school, he's going to be driving next year or whatever. And he's just taking notes. Is that okay? I was like, well, sure. That's pretty cool that he's interested in it. Great. I wasn't thinking about that at 15 or 16. I was thinking about girls, but all right, that works for me. So he was coming to the meetings. Lo and behold, he winds up getting mentored by me and two or three of my friends, and then goes on. I actually eventually kind of like, hog-tied him and dragged him to the apartment association, says, you will get involved with this, and got him involved with that and stuff. Then, of course, he beat my record of being the youngest, president of the group and stuff. But then now here he is. He's got a nice portfolio, a couple thousand units, and broken up into a little bit smaller properties. So there's also a larger number of properties than what I would have had with 2,000 units, because I had larger deals, some of them 500, 600 units. So I felt like a good diversity of properties and all in my market. And I said, John, his name is John Boryak. I said, John, I've got to get your help on this. Would you pretty please let me talk to your supervisor, Jackie, who I know, and get all your latest numbers on your portfolio for all of your income, all of your expenses, so I can come up with some averages by category and apply that to my underwriting model. And that way, my basis for underwriting these deals is based in reality of current market income and expenses in my same geographic area, within my same asset class. And by the way, also using an independent owner, like owner-operator model like I do, because that can make a difference in the numbers as well. So I just sought out someone who was willing to share that data. And then as I've started underwriting deals, now I have a basis that isn't overly conservative or aggressive. It's not biased by my sort of, I've been around forever and, the numbers used to be this, but it's not biased by some sort of like enthusiasm if I need to get a deal done. It's just, that's the data. And that's what the data says. And then even with that, I have a second layer of kind of protection towards your question, which is I don't do what I did at the beginning of my career prior to 0809. What I learned from that experience is that I always have sort of a best case, worst case. And I kind of look at it across that spectrum. And then I try to base my private placement and what I'm offering to LPs off that worst case number. And if that worst case number doesn't work in the deal, then I won't do it, because I've learned all too well that unexpected things do happen. And so it is going to affect that number. And in the beginning, I didn't have that range. There was just, this is the number. Now I'll tell the investors, hey, this is the range. And I tell them, if you're not comfortable though with this lower end that I'm telling you I think we'll do, then don't do it. Don't do it because you're just hoping it'll be on the higher end. Like if that happens, that's just a gift from God. Like let's not plan on that. But I didn't know that in the beginning. So I think that's the key, is you've got to get data from a third party that's truly objective. And if you don't have friends that have it, you can buy it. There are services that have that information. Use that for your underwriting, and then project a range of outcomes where if your assumptions have positive or negative variance, which they will, you just don't know which way it's going to go. Now you kind of have, managed expectations.
One of my favorite tools in like real estate, and it's a little more advanced. You probably wouldn't do this necessarily for a single family deal, though you definitely could, is a sensitivity matrix. Right? Where the idea of like, we have like a box and you have a spreadsheet, and along one side, it's like, hey, I think that, you can do it for any two variables, but you say, hey, cap rates are going to be this, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6, 6.5. And then my whatever NOI is going to be, this, or this. And then you can just kind of take those 2 points and find out what's the value of your property. But you could do it also like, hey, the timeline and ARV for a flip or whatever. But it basically lets you go, what's best case, base case, worst case across two different variables. If that sounds confusing to everybody, I'm sorry. Look up sensitivity matrix online, but it's a super powerful tool. I love to see that. Like when anybody pitches a deal to me, I always want them to put in a sensitivity matrix, because I'm like, I just want to look at the worst case, like your worst. I want to see what that is, see if I agree with your assumptions, and then ask, would I do the deal at that? And if I would do the deal, if I like it at the worst, then there's a good chance I'm going to move forward and hope for the best. But I don't want to be pitched on the best.
Exactly.
It's never.
And the way I do it, because I don't have a matrix per se, but I just take that model, and this is what anyone can do. They have some kind of model if they're buying deals, I hope, right? They can get one from the 50 books you've written, or a lot of the other places they can get one. And they take that model and just run those numbers. So for example, if they're looking at potential rent growth, if they're looking at cap rate, or if they're looking at any of the major inputs that determine the outcome, and just stress those, one way or the other, and have that range. And by rerunning that same model and just, I'm a little old fashioned, I just print the dang thing. And then I'm looking at it, right? And then like, here's the net annualized number for all of the cash flow, whether it's from operations, whether it's from sale proceeds, anything and everything that went in, anything and everything that went out. I don't believe in IRR. It's so manipulatable, right? Like the risk-free rate can change discounted cash flow analysis massively. It's complicated. It's easily manipulated. Just plain old-fashioned annualized cash on cash return, including everything from the beginning all the way to the disposition. And if you back that number out in the same underwriting model, but with each of those variables adjusted for your sensitivity analysis, there's your matrix. Like you don't even have to have anything with that fancy. So sorry if that was like a little bit elementary what I just said, but I want to kind of break down what you said, because I feel like for some investors, they're like, a sensitivity matrix. Oh my God, that sounds like something, really complicated.
Yeah, we're just talking, we're just going to test our assumptions. What are your assumptions? Let's what could happen and what could happen on two different sides of the thing. And stress test it. And just, it's so valuable. There's a book out there, and then I know Cam, you had a question, but there's a book out there. Have you read The Road Less Stupid? Either of you guys read this one? Keith Cunningham?
No, I'd love to.
It's one of my favorite books of the last couple of years. But there was a page in the book that I underlined, and then I noticed it was so important. He put on the back page, but this is the line. It said this. And this is like my favorite line in the whole book. I have found in my 45-year business career that the majority of my mistakes and losses were a result of unexamined assumptions and tolerating an inferior team that did not execute consistently. And when I think about every loss I've had, it's assumptions. We assume that ARV is going to be this. We assume NOI is going to be this. We assume that. We don't stress test it. We don't ask advice from a gray hair, somebody who's actually been there. We just make an assumption. We don't examine it, or we just don't execute correctly internally. And we can solve the execution thing down the road. You can fix execution, but if you buy something incorrectly because you made just poor assumptions, it's hard to dig out of that hole. So anyway, I highly recommend this book, World Less Stupid. Really
over it right
solid.
now.
I wrote it down. I'm going to read it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I know that was also for your
yeah.
audience, but I'm going to take it like you were just helping out me. And I'm
Yeah.
gonna,
I was telling you guys. It's
okay, cool.
yeah, it's a super good book. Anyway, all right, Cam, go ahead.
Love it. Well, I know we have to start wrapping up, but I did have one question for you, Trey. As it's 2025, market has been crazy the last couple of years. And so what do you think like the real estate market is doing right now, and where are we headed with the real estate market?
So I think it's one of the most exciting markets. I mean, it's really the best market that we've had when you think from a buyer's perspective since 08, 09. Everybody is complaining about the market, and I've been praying for rain for quite a while. I mean, I felt like once the kids got back in school, if at some point the right opportunity came along, who knows, maybe I'd get off the bench. Maybe I'd just do it to KP a buddy's deal or something and help them get the deal closed. But then when I started getting more serious about doing it, I was like kind of frustrated because I'm like, man, interest rates have moved. Prices should therefore, on a correlated basis, because they have an inverse relationship to interest rates, they should be down. And prices hadn't really moved down that much yet. And yet, if the debt's twice as expensive, obviously your cash flow is going to be half as much. So why are the properties not half as much? Like there was this big mismatch. But I'm finally starting to see that happen. I'm seeing deals like recently at 50 a door. I haven't seen 50 a door in a decade on multifamily in Houston. So I'm not saying every deal is going to be that price point, and it depends on the condition, how much renovation is going to be required. Is it or is it not in a floodplain? Like there's other factors that you have to look at. How much are you going to spend in working capital if you have to re-tenant the whole property? So you have to factor all those into the underwriting. But just in general, I'm seeing that happen. As an example, a buddy of mine, Russell Jones, he sold over 40 billion, with a B as in boy, $40 billion worth of apartments just here in Houston in his career. And he's done a lot of deals with me over the years. Him and his wife, Taryn, are good friends of Erica and I's. And we've traveled with them and stuff like that too. And so I look to him sometimes just to learn, because they have this huge firm, Newmark, formerly ARA, probably the biggest firm in the country for multifamily. And the majority of the market transactions are theirs for multifamily in Houston, which is very rare for one firm to have over 50% of the transactions in the largest market for this asset in America, right? So they're a juggernaut, and he's one of the senior partners there, does a lot of volume. And I was talking to him just recently, a couple of weeks ago, and he said he's at the point now where multiple times per week, he gets a call from a lender saying, all right, we've been trying to protect the bond value, but we're gonna have to go and take this thing back. So get us a BOV. Let's figure out what's going to look like if we take it back, and have you guys go sell it for us and see whether we're upside down or not. Like they've been avoiding that conversation because they didn't want to know. When you're trying to preserve bond value as a lender, and they've sold these things in the secondary market, a lot of times the CMBS loans or even agency product that they want to lay off some of the paper. What happens is that now that bank is in kind of this extend and pretend mode where they don't want to have to go tell the bondholders, we got to discount this thing. You're going to lose principal. But they're finally saying, we can't push it off any further. And he said the big change is that, post-election, a lot of people are kind of waiting to see what was going to happen. And what's happened is they've realized, at least as long as Jay Powell is still in there, we've got a while to go where we're not going to see rates just massively drop, or at least people don't think that they will. So the rescue boats that said like survive until 25 were not on their way. And we're not seeing this big drop off. So now lenders are looking at that going, all right, well, if we're going to be in for another year, maybe longer, we've already kicked the can down the road on these maturities, on these expired rate caps. I guess we're going to have to go and take this stuff back. And when that starts to happen and more of them jump on that bandwagon, we should see a nice influx of properties that we can go out and buy at a significant discount, which should have happened from a macroeconomic standpoint really 2 years ago, right? When rates shot up. But instead, it's like everybody's been in this holding pattern of not wanting, it's like the emperor has no clothes, like going down the street, everybody's like, oh, look how nice his garments are. But really he's naked, right? And that's been these deals for a long time. If you look at TREP, the database that all the servicers subscribe to, that's got, 95% of the commercial loans, you can see all the maturities, all the terms, which ones are headed for receivership, which ones have less than 1.0 debt service coverage ratios, which ones have expiring rate caps. You can see it all there. There have been hundreds of billions of dollars of deals that were already in this position where the distressed upside down, notes. But what was going on? Not a whisper. Everybody's just extend and pretend, extend and pretend. Rates will come down once the Fed gets inflation under control, and then all this will go back to the way that it was. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen anytime soon. And in fact, the rates that we all got used to for the better part of a decade that were artificially manipulated rates, a Fed funds rate of 0. I mean, come on, effective rates on multifamily of 2 or 3%, crazy. Like I've still got a 3% loan on a property right now for $38 million with 8 years left to go on it, full term IO, just like throwing free money at me. Like, okay, I'll take it. I'd go put it in a high yield savings bond and make 4 and arbitrage the bank on a piece of commercial real estate. That's crazy, So what's happening right now is that we're just having a reckoning, I think, for the asset bubble that we built, by basically having a combination of never ending increases in asset value into a bubble and then printing $4.2 trillion and then the ensuing results of that. But the rescue boats are not on the way. So this is the time that you're going to have a massive transfer of wealth. And if you're sitting on deals that are in a bad position, you're going to have to recapitalize, you have to restructure and work through that like I did back in 08, 09. And that way you get through the market. Then when it rebounds, irrational exuberance kicks in and we get a whole new high, even higher than the last peak. Those deals will end well. They will have a happy ending if you can hang on to them until that time. In the meantime, you've got a dollar cost average and buy into this downturn at a low cost basis to bring your overall portfolio break-even point down, just like if it were stocks or anything else, right? And so for people that are in these deals that are scared, what I would say is they've got to first, of course, address that capital stack and figure out what they've got to do to get through this downturn and get to the other side where it winds up working out okay. Believe me, I did not think the deals I bought in 04 through 07 were going to be okay at certain times in 08 and 09. But they were, right? We got out the other side and they came out even better than I thought. So you've got to restructure if you need to get through that period, face reality, but especially for people who are in a position to help their investors go out, or they themselves investor go out and buy into this. This is a massive opportunity. Like if you look at my balance sheet today, those deals that I went out and bought in 08, 09, forget all the other stuff. Like that's 90% of the money, right? Because those things were all home runs. Like, monkey throwing darts at a dartboard, you're going to hit a great deal in the market at that time. It's not quite as good as that yet, but I think we could get there or at least get halfway there. And that would be fine. That would be so much better of an opportunity than we've had in years. So I'm super excited about where the market's at right now. And I feel like we've been overdue for this correction that I've been predicting since 2015. It took a little longer. That tends to happen when you print trillions of dollars, but we're finally there. So I'm super pumped about it.
It's awesome.
Very cool, man. That was a good, thorough answer.
Really great answer.
Sorry, it was too long.
All right, got two personal questions for you before we move on to the 3, 2, 1 pivot. But you play violin and do jujitsu, I hear.
Yeah, I'm not a great violinist anymore, but I was first year and president of the orchestra, which I think made me chief nerd in junior high. I started playing when I was 4 years old. My aunt played the violin and taught me. And so I was doing my first recitals. I'm sure they were god awful, but I was doing them, at an early age. So yeah, on your questionnaire of embarrassing stuff, I was like, am I really going to put this? I was like, all right, I'll put it out there. But yeah, so that was my youth. And then I started Taekwondo at the age of 11. And then starting in college, I kind of discovered mixed martial arts when it was very much in its infancy. And now that I'm getting a bit older, the part of mixed martial arts that I can still do without massive injuries all the time at my age now, at 46, is the jiu-jitsu part. So I'm not saying I'm great at it. In fact, Brandon and I were at a JITS breakout session at Limitless this past year where we both were speakers. And, I realized now that a lot of my JITS was tailored around MMA, and I'm going to have to really step up my game if I'm not allowed to punch, knee, elbow, kick, throw, any of that stuff. But yeah, a little bit of diverse activities, I guess you could say.
It's awesome.
Very cool, man. Very cool. All right, well, let's head over to the next segment of the show. It's the 3, 2, 1 pivot. The idea of your life is going one direction and then something causes it to pivot in a more positive way. So we'll start with 3 books that have pivoted your life.
So, on the books, I thought about this. I know you ask this question on every show. I'm a fan of the show. And I thought, man, I'm going to give the same answer that so many people have given on a couple of these books. But it's just the truth. So I'm going to say it anyway. For me, I know it's redundant from other guests, but Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I mean, when I was in college and I was lost and I thought, man, I really don't want to be an investment banker. And I remember I went like on one kind of summer program deal out to Denton in Texas, a small town where the University of North Texas is located.
Yeah.
And I had an investment banker from ING, which is a big insurance and brokerage firm, meet with me out there and talk about how much they would love to hire me out of college, describe what I'd be doing every day. I was just like, oh my God, this is not what I want to do, but this is my major. I guess this is what I'm doing. It is not going back to Pasadena and it is having a better life, but I don't know, am I gonna make it? And then I read that book. I was like, oh, that's in this, E category. And what I want is to be in the B or the I, quadrant. I mean, I know that now that's almost become common knowledge to people that are interested in like these types of books, but that was like groundbreaking stuff to me in the 90s when I came across it. And it completely changed my life. And actually, Brandon, when we were at Limitless and I got to meet Robert for the first time, and we were on that casino night, and I was telling him about kind of my journey and doing 6,000 units. It all started with his book, my very first rent house. It was kind of this full circle moment. So
That's
it didn't
cool.
mean much to him, but it meant a lot to me. It was really cool
That's
for me.
awesome.
The second book for me
cool,
is another kind of probably basic that a lot of people have quoted, but The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clayson. Because the thing with Rich Dad Poor Dad is it gave me a direction. Okay, I want to save money. I want to try to put it into business or investment so I'm not like a slave to a job. And I don't want to be sort of a modern indentured servant in some cubicle 9 to 5 until forevermore, Quoth the Raven type of thing. I was trying to figure out like how to do that. And I realized that The Richest Man in Babylon, it tells you like a recipe book, like exactly how to do it. I know this is probably, my wife will get mad, this is a little blasphemous, but I feel like that book is like the Bible of money, where it's kind of telling you like, no, stupid. It's these basic things like living within your means, setting this amount aside to pay down debt and this amount of money you set aside, to save. And then when that accumulates, don't invest it, in something that you don't know anything about, or the person that you're investing it with doesn't know anything about, seek out insurance, make of your home a good investment. It was practical, like actionable steps that I could take in a spreadsheet. Being a finance guy, I love spreadsheets, that I could then start to have the investment capital little by little. And I've stuck to that to this day, as far as like using that strategy every year. I reread that book every single January. I've reread it every year for, 15, 20 years now, because like Kanye West said, I have a little problem with spending money before I get it if I'm not careful. So I like to go back and reread that book and make sure I'm keeping myself in check. Because no matter how much money you make, you could always spend more. You can always be MC Hammer if you're not careful. Then really this third book, it was kind of like the next how-to. It was The Complete Guide to Buying and Selling Apartment Buildings by Steve Burgess. And that book,
I love that book.
Was just amazing. I tell you the coolest thing, Brandon. So years ago, I had a broker call me up and he said, man, don't you always give out copies of that book, The Complete Guide to Buying and Selling Apartments? I said, yeah. And the broker's name was Tom Wilkinson that made this call. And he knows because he'd spoken at my group before. He'd been on my radio show before. I gave it away on the radio. I'm like the biggest fan of this book. Me and my buddy Emery that I talked about earlier, we've had 2 boats together over the years because you never use a boat all the time. So it's good to own one with a buddy. And one of them, the name of the boat was The Value Play, after that concept that we learned from Steve's book, right? So he said, hey, he's going to be in town. He's doing a seminar. Do you want to go? I'm like, do I want to go? I'm going to go and like be his biggest cheerleader. So I go to this thing. Well, long story short, he winds up coming to work for me for 4 or 5 years. So he became an employee, and then we got to collaborate together on deals for like a number of years. And it was just this cool, like full circle moment. But that book, when I first read it, dude, it was like Japanese stereo instructions. I was so lost, and I had to read it and reread it and reread it. And then years later, by the time he worked for me, we'd go through deals and then Underwriting and be like, I love what you did here, Steve, because he was in charge. That was my chief investment officer at the time. And I'd say, but I think maybe you missed this and this. Could we tweak that? Or am I missing something there? And he'd be like, oh, crap. All right. Yeah, I see your point. Let's make that change. And, a little bit of me was like, I was happy he made that mistake and that I could catch it, because I was that same dopey guy that didn't understand anything in his book the first time that I read it. So anyway, I love that book for a lot of reasons.
It's incredible. Awesome. Next, two pivot people that have changed the direction of your life.
So Emery Jacob, the guy I just mentioned, with the boats, he was that guy that I was working on his loan for A-Leaf Square. a 240 unit apartment complex on Cook Road many, many years ago. And that was the one as his mortgage broker where I didn't get the deal because the bank I was working with wound up retrading him. And so he said, you know what, I'm going to go with another loan. I'm like, crap, I just lost my commission. But what was more valuable than the commission was I made friends with someone that became a lifelong friend and a mentor. And he was the guy that I was bugging after he said, oh, you should go do apartments. And like 7 a.m. the next day, I'm like, what do I do next, boss? And he's like, I don't know. Don't call me at 7 a.m, you idiot. But I didn't know any better. He to this day has pictures of me power washing the sidewalk outside the leasing office of the first property that I ever got into with him. Because I was like, give me a job, any job. And he was just trying to give me stuff to make me go away. But I wouldn't go away no matter how crappy the job was. And that was one of them, right? The next person is a good friend, I think, of Brandon and I both, Steve Rosenberg. And the reason I pick him is because it's been a big pivot for me coming back to the business after all these years. And so I joined Steve's business coaching program, and he's my business coach. So I'm able to help him with real estate questions sometimes. He knows a lot about real estate, but I've done maybe a little bit more of it. But he's that kind of 50,000 foot overview person that looks at what I'm doing as a business owner. And also, I love his style. He's like, Trey, don't you think it's kind of stupid that you're doing blah, 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 blah? Like, I love that. I want somebody to be that real with me, because a lot of people in my circle are going to be kind of, yes manning me on different things because, they're working for me or they're a vendor or they're a broker that makes money for me. Having that person that can, tell you the truth, like that friend that tells you like, do they sell guys shirts, where you bought that shirt? Like having that kind of truth from somebody is like so helpful. And Steve's network as well. I mean, I wouldn't know Brandon without Steve or Tarl or Eric Upchurch or a lot of the key, Nathan Brooks, so many people that I know now that I've been learning from about how this business works in this new era. I'd still be.
And all previous guests on the podcast, all those guys have been on the podcast.
Yeah. He hooked me up with Brad Lee, who I'm going on March 14th. And I think Brad's been on your podcast too. So
Brad's been on my podcast too. Yeah.
On a circle.
Yeah. Tell him I said, what's up?
I will.
Oh, cool, man. Next one, one pivot quote or a quote you live by or that changed your life.
Absolutely. So this is maybe going to sound odd for one to live by, but I'll explain it. That quote, and I don't know if it was initially from this book, but it's a book called Those Who Remain, and by Hopf. And this quote was, strong men, create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And the reason that's such a valuable quote for me is that I've kind of learned to appreciate the difficulty. So like when something is really hard, or whether it's thinking about a hard experience and being, anxious about getting back into a similar experience, come back in the business and what if this happens and what if that happens? I think it's so valuable to be able to look at that and go, yeah, but you know what? All that crap that I've been through, all that stuff that I've been through is what's made me strong. It's what's made me great at what I do and created this sort of like, I probably should know better, but I do it anyway, thing that you have to really have to be a successful entrepreneur. And I think that too many young men today are really not being brought up that way, And so one of my goals with my son is it's like, like Jordan Peterson says, like, I want him to be a monster, but who is a just and kind person who wants to use that strength and that skill and that power and that knowledge to actually like stop bullies and be, a good person. Because I don't think that it makes you a good person or to be nonviolent or to take up for people or not start stuff when you couldn't finish it if you wanted to anyway, right? Like you need to have that ability in order to then have the freedom of choice to do instead the right thing. And I think that our whole country right now is kind of having a little bit of awakening to this concept right now that like, you know what? There's a place for masculinity still in America today. And that if you want to be a great provider and a great protector, like that's a wonderful thing. And that's what we need. And also from an economic standpoint, a great producer, which ties back to that great provider. And that's an example that I think in a way has been maligned over the past decade, to our detriment. So to me, that's just something that helps me recognize adversity as an opportunity to get better and get stronger. And, that's something that I take some comfort in.
Love that.
Very cool, man.
Amazing. All right, we're going to move over to our next segment and we'll look at your past, present, and future. And so if you could go back to 20-year-old Trey and give him a piece of advice, what would that advice be?
I think I would say that when I got into investing, just never sell anything. Like, honestly, every deal that I've sold today is worth so much exponentially more money than what it was then. And there were some deals that when people got deal fatigue, I would just buy them out, right, at a price they were very happy with. I should just kept doing that. I could have afforded it. I just could have kept buying people out. I still own all those deals today. And good Lord, the cost basis that I had in those things, how much equity and how much cash flow they've been today and what I could accomplish with that. One of the things that drives me is turning these properties around and not having kids grow up in the environment where I did by making them safe. And I also see properties that I've owned that now they're back in that condition again. And that also frustrates me a lot because I know what it took to get the gangbangers and the drug dealers, out of those properties and turned around and then turn them over to somebody and then watch them kind of fall back into that is so frustrating. So not only would it have created more legacy and more lasting change, but I'd have, more wealth from my family today. Not that we need it per se, but I'm just saying ultimately financially it would have worked out as well. And I've learned since then that there are some very wealthy family offices out there that's what they do. They accumulate real estate and they keep it for just a really, really long time. And it winds up working out great. And if they need cash, they just refi, So that may sound like a really weird specific thing, but I look back at the last 26 years of real estate investing and man, if I just would have not sold,
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Hey, what about the present, like an action or a habit or a routine, something you've done in the last maybe year or so that's given you just a better life?
So as I got back to work and kind of rediscovered some purpose and got fired back up again, now that I'm not the sun, the moon, and the stars for my kids like I was when they were really little, which is so, frustrating. So then you're trying to find your next thing. Yeah. One of the things I realized is that my fitness had really gotten out of control. Like there was a time in my life when I had, lower single digits body fat and stayed that way, year round. And all of a sudden I found myself, during this time I'd taken off up at 274 pounds and really out of breath, just going up like a flight of stairs to my game room or whatever and going, oh my God, what happened to me? At one time I was a personal trainer at one point even, you know what I mean? Like how did I become this blob of fat, like don't want to take my shirt off, I'm like, let me not look in the mirror when I get out of the shower and see how out of shape I am. I just felt really bad about myself, but I wasn't really that motivated to do anything about it. And I think it was because of that sedentary, retirement sucks, being in that place where you don't have that drive. So what I did was I went out and I hired a nutritionist and I had known the guy for a long time, but hadn't seen him in a long time. And he helped me immediately just make a lot of changes that in a way I probably knew that I needed to make, but having those check-ins and that accountability, I mean, nothing like when you got those body fat calipers to make you go, okay, like what have I been eating or drinking? And when am I going to come back and do this again? Like, how long do I have? Can I sneak in a cheat meal today? But then, you've got to stay on track because you've got that next accountability check-in. And it's maybe a third party, but it had to come from within me to hire that third party to hold myself accountable. That's been super valuable.
Love it.
Amazing.
Love it.
Awesome. And the last question for you, and we've kind of talked a little bit about your kids. And so what do you want your kids to say about you when you're gone?
I think the main thing I hope that they say is that I was always there. I try really hard to be present. And it's tough to do sometimes now, kind of being back to the business and feeling some days like, gosh, is this a startup again after all these years? Kind of, feels that way. But luckily, I'm in a position this time around to say, you know what, if I need to turn off the phone and that affects me financially, like, I can take that. And so that's something that I feel like that's the biggest choice. Like, you're going to be the parent you are, like either way. Like you're not going to magically be this totally different person. But what you do get to choose is you get to choose like how much you're there. And I feel like when I was growing up, my parents weren't perfect, but if they just would have been there a lot more, that alone would have I would have known how much I mattered. So I try to do that for my kids.
Amazing. It's the most important thing, I think, just being a present parent. So love that.
Yeah. All right, man, let's wrap things up. Where can people, actually, no, I'll leave that from Cam. What's exciting you? What's coming up in your life right now that's coming up that you're like fired up about?
Man, I'm just super excited. I'm buying new deals again. So I closed one on December 19th, first time in a decade, whoop, whoop, back. And I'm doing that. Got 3 deals right now that I'm actually working on. And so that's exciting to have deals under contract and feel like the prices are good. The numbers actually work. And then on top of that, I've had some exciting opportunities recently, like this podcast and the one I mentioned coming up with Brad. And was just asked by Eric and his group, Jill over there at ADPI, to maybe do their podcast and come back for their conference. And then I was just contacted by a national Hispanic, housing association to go down and speak at their conference coming up in April in Miami and talk about how to make sure there's plenty of workforce and affordable housing and homeownership for Latinos in this country. And being a Houstonian and being married to my wife, who was born in Mexico, and she's a citizen, and she's very Americanized in some ways, but she's also a proud, Mexican heritage Latina who was born in Guadalajara. And the fact that the majority of our residents in the Houston area, because the majority of the renters of BC properties are Hispanic, like how cool. Like I'm not Hispanic, I'm German and English, but they want me to come talk. Like that's really cool. So I'm pumped about that. So just getting to help people do it. And also, I feel like this time around, I don't have that insecurity that if there's something about my business model, somebody finds out that it's going to harm me in some way. So this time around, I'm actually just giving everybody my business model at every speaking engagement that I have. I give out our checklist of every single thing I do to turn the properties around. Because what I've realized is that's what our country needs. Like we need to solve the housing problem because that's where the inequality gets so out of control that you start creating this almost like kind of hidden civil war within our society. And I think that ultimately a person's home is like their sense of safety and permanence and family. So I love the fact that now I've tried a bunch of different stuff and I have a formula that really works for making these properties safer and nicer and turning them around that I can share openly with other people without having that scarcity mentality I had when I was a kid, where you worry like, well, if I tell them all the secrets, then now I won't be able to do it anymore. It's like, no, we can all do it and it'll be fine. We'll all just make, it a better place. And so that's exciting for me.
Amazing. Love that. Last question. Where can people find you at?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, my website, treystone.com, and on social media and all the different platforms, it's the Trey Stone because Trey Stone was taken. So the Trey Stone, if you want to look up my handle there. Also, one of the things I wanted to offer for any listeners is that, I've gotten this feedback, just constantly every week from at least a couple of people. If they're in a deal and they just want to kind of get like a third party check-in, like a health checkup on that deal and have us look at it and go, are you fine just to ride this thing out? Or maybe you upside down, you need to look at that and do something about it. I found a lot of these people really don't even know how to make those calculations, and our team can do that for them for free. So if they want to shoot me an email, just Trey, Trey, at treystone.com, I'll make sure we help them with that. And we'll look at their capital stack, their cost basis, and their NOI and help them figure out where they are if they're in a multifamily deal, because a lot of people are in that upheaval in the market right now, but they're not sure how to kind of back into like an independent valuation of where they are versus the debt. And just in general, if they want to learn about the deals that we're putting together, would love to have that, or find out when I might be speaking at one of the upcoming conferences, or just get in contact with my team, just want to BS with me about multifamily, whatever it is, they can reach me, just Trey at treystone.com. Doesn't get easier than that.
Awesome.
Perfect, man.
Love it.
Dude, it's been amazing. Thank you. I love getting to know your story more because I know you, but I didn't know a lot of your story. So it's super cool. And man, I look forward to hanging out with you again. And I think we're going to be in Denver, and we're going to be in a couple other cool spots this year for the 50s. So appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for this opportunity. Brandon, thanks for letting me be a part of your group. I'm part of your Better Life tribe and part of the 50, and then now getting to know you through the conference circuit. And then this has just been really cool. And, I think a lot of people know that you're like a very kind, nice guy, but I can attest to the fact that your abundance mentality is legit, because you didn't have to help me. We're both syndicators. We're in the same space. We even have some investors that are ODC investors that are also, my investors. And you've just been such a, not to be cheesy, but it's been an open door where you're like, what do you want to know? Let's go figure it out, how we can help you.
Thanks, man.
I don't have a lot of people that walk that talk. So just thank you for being so genuine. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. All right, guys. Have a good one. Appreciate you. And that, my friends, is the show. Thank you for tuning in. And hey, before you go, if you enjoyed this episode or if you just enjoy the show in general, please consider leaving us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. We really do value your feedback, and we read the comments. We make future decisions about topics and guests and everything else. Plus, it helps us reach more people, and the more reviews we get, the more people hear it and watch the show and share it, and it's awesome. Last but not least, please head over to social media. Consider befriending me, following me, subscribing to all that stuff at Better Life and my personal page at Beardy Brandon, especially over on Instagram, YouTube, and really everywhere else. So thank you again for listening. I'm honored that you would bring me along on your journey toward building wealth through real estate investing without losing your soul. Now, this show is about living a better life, but if you want my opinion on what it takes to live the best life ever, just go to abetterlife.com/best life to hear some of my views on life and spirituality. I think you'll like it. abetterlife.com/best life. With that said, thanks for listening to the show. We'll see you next week.